It's a beautiful day today. My camera had a hard time capturing how bright it was, but it is bright and sunny. One of my children and I went to our local community garden this morning and harvested a bunch of herbs. They are planning to prune everything down tomorrow, and so this was our last chance to harvest some lavender buds and rosemary, oregano, and rose hips. I harvested a few bouquets of mint flowers as well, which I think are so beautiful. Everything just smells divine. I have been kind of struggling with knowing if I should continue sharing on YouTube, and if I do continue, what I should share. I'm more and more sort of put off by the need to continually put out content, that sort of treadmill that you have to be on in order for your content to be seen. I basically signed off of Instagram and TikTok. I didn't find them good for my mental health. I didn't find them good for my focus. And YouTube, there's lots of people on YouTube that I've learned so much from. And I want to be one of those people that I can teach people things I know about herbal remedies and, a more simplified way of living. But I don't like the power that the company, Google, YouTube has over me to have to continually show up on this platform in order for anything I make to be seen. The business model of the companies is so reliant on the labor of content creators, and so I understand how this power dynamic has developed. But it does come with this consequence of being required to sacrifice time, other priorities potentially, in order to stay on this treadmill, which is, facilitating the livelihood of so many people. I find the whole dynamic quietly violent, and so I'm sort of thinking through all of that at the moment. This morning at the community garden, we also harvested some rose hips. Over on my website, documentingsimpleliving.com, I recently shared a recipe for making rose hip syrup, which I love to have in sparkling water. I think I definitely need to make another batch with some of these rose hips as well. I'm also making a huge batch of arnica salve today. I use arnica salve on my kids and myself when we have bruises or sore muscles. I began by infusing an oil with arnica, and this infused oil will be the base of the salve. I used some dried arnica flowers that I had on hand, and I filled a pint jar with about half a cup of dried flowers. You can, of course, use fresh flowers as well. I would just say to harvest them and then leave them sit on your counter for a few days to let the bulk of the moisture evaporate before using them to infuse the oil. And then I covered the flowers with about 1 cup of a carrier oil. I'm using sweet almond oil and jojoba oil here, but olive oil would work great, or fractionated coconut oil as well. Then add a lid and date it and label it and let it sit in a dark place for 8 weeks or so. I have linked in the description below the full step-by-step instructions for how to make arnica oil as well as this arnica salve. So if you're someone who learns better by reading or you want to save the recipe, then make sure to check out that blog post. I used a butter knife to make sure that the oil got all the way to the bottom of the jar and then topped it up a little bit more so everything was completely covered with oil. After about 8 weeks, you can strain off your oil using cheesecloth, and you can also just use the oil on your skin. I like to use it just directly on my skin to help with bumps and bruises, but I do prefer having arnica in the form of a salve because I find it easier to apply, especially with children. So once you have your infused oil, you just need to combine it with beeswax and shea butter. First, mix together 3 tablespoons of beeswax and a tablespoon of shea butter in a double boiler, melt them together. I will leave links for all of these supplies in the description below in case you can't find a source local to you and you want to give this a try. While everything melts together, I'm going to quickly make a batch of comfrey oil, which again I'll later use as a salve after it's fully infused. Comfrey helps with deeper healing in the body, and I have found it useful to help with some persistent pain I've had in one of my knees. I'm just adding about half a cup of dried comfrey to a pint jar and then covering it with about a cup of oil. For this one, I'm using my absolute favorite olive oil, which is a bit painful because it's so expensive and you do have to use, a cup of it. But I like the richness it adds to the comfrey salve. so I'm willing to depart with some of my olive oil. I'll link the oil that I'm using here. I buy it in bulk. It is expensive, I think like 40 pounds or so, but it's, a bulk amount and it's pretty good quality. Once the shea butter and beeswax are melted together, add in 1 cup of your arnica infused oil and whisk that all in until everything is melted and combined. I had some arnica oil from earlier this year, so I just poured that oil into this salve out of the dropper bottle that we had been storing it in and using it from. So everything is melted together to make the salve, so I'm just going to remove it from the heat and pour it into my salve jar. I normally use ambered glass little salve jars, but I only had this larger glass jar on hand. But really any glass jar works, just as long as it's not an awkward shape where you can't get the salve out of the bottom of the jar. And then you want to just let it harden for 24 or 48 hours. I made a huge batch this time, and so I'm letting it sit for about 2 days before I add a lid, so it's completely hardened. If you add a lid too soon, it'll have some condensation, which isn't great for having your salve last a long time. I also wanted to quickly show you some dinner rolls I made after making the salve. Our oven broke, unfortunately, a while back, and in the meantime, we're using this little tabletop oven, and it's a bit tricky to make bread in because it seems to heat up really quickly and can overcook the top of things and leave the middle of things undercooked. But I'm really grateful that we have it, and I thought these sourdough dinner rolls came out pretty good. Make sure to bookmark the arnica salve over on documentingsimpleliving.com, and I'll speak to you in the next video.